Hello and welcome to Classical Titerature, the show where, yes, I did have this lying in my closet. Thanks for asking. Now, those of you that are following along may have noticed that we are near the end of the story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. In fact, we are on the last book of the story of Three Worthies, which is the story of Sir Gawaine. So, to close out this book, I figured it might be fun to get medieval on it. Believe it or not, this is actually a lot comfier than most of my clothing. Now, normally, I would break a book apart into several pieces, but since the story of Sir Gawaine is only 3 chapters long, let's see if we can't tackle it all today. Part 3. The Story of Sir Gawaine. Here followeth the story of Sir Gawaine, and of how he discovered such wonderful faithfulness unto King Arthur, who was his lord, that I do not believe that the like of such faithfulness was ever seen before. For indeed, though Sir Gawaine was at times very rough, and very harsh in his manner, and though he was always so plain-spoken that his words hid the gentle nature that lay within him, yet, under this pride of manner, was much courtesy, and at times he was so urbane of manner, and so soft of speech, that he was called by many the Knight of the Silver Tongue. So here ye shall read how his faithfulness unto King Arthur brought him such high reward, that almost anyone in all the world might envy him his great fortune. Chapter 1st. How a white hart appeared before King Arthur, and how Sir Gawaine and Gaheris, his brother, went in pursuit thereof, and of what befell them in that quest. Upon a certain time King Arthur, together with Queen Guinevere and all of his court, were making progression through that part of his kingdom which was not very near to Camelot. At this time the king journeyed in a very great state, and Queen Guinevere had her court about her, so there were many squires and pages. Wherefore, what with knights, lords, and ladies in attendance, more than 60 of people were with the king and queen. Now it chanced that at this time the season of the year was very warm, so that when the middle of the day had come, the king commanded that a number of pavilions should be spread for their accommodation, wherein that they might rest there until the heat of the day had passed. So the attendant spread 3 pavilions in a pleasant glade upon the outskirts of the forest. When this had been done, the king gave command that the tables, whereat they were to eat their midday meal, should be spread beneath the shadow of that glade of trees, for there was a gentle wind blowing, and there were many birds singing, so that it was very pleasant to sit in the open air. Accordingly the attendants of the court did as the king commanded, and the tables were set upon the grass beneath the shade, and the king and queen and all the lords and ladies of their courts sat down to that cheerful repast. Now whiles they sat there feasting with great contentment of spirit, and with much mirth and goodly talk among themselves, there came of a sudden a great outcry from the woodland that was near by, and therewith there burst forth from the cover of that leafy wilderness a very beautiful white hart, pursued by a white brachet of equal beauty. And there was not a hair upon either of these animals that was not as white as milk, and each wore about its neck a collar of gold, very beautiful to behold. The hound pursued the white hart with a very great outcry and bellowing, and the hart fled in the utmost terror. In this wise they ran thrice around the table where King Arthur and his court sat at meat, and twice in that chase the hound caught the hart and pinched it on its haunch, and therewith the hart leapt away. And all they who sat there observed that there was blood at 2 places upon its haunch where the hound had pinched it. But each time the hart escaped from the hound, and the hound followed after it with much outcry of yelling, so that King Arthur and Queen Guinevere and all their court were annoyed at the noise and the tumult that those 2 creatures made. Then the hart fled away into the forest again by another path, and the hound pursued it, and both were gone, and the baying of the hound sounded more and more distant as it ran away into the woodland. Now ere the king and queen and their court had recovered from their astonishment at these things, there suddenly appeared at that part of the forest whence the hart and the hound had emerged a knight and a lady, and the knight was of very lordly presence, and the lady was exceedingly beautiful. The knight was clad in half armor, and the lady was clad in green, as though for the chase. And the knight rode upon a charger of dapple grey, and the lady upon a piebald palfrey. With them were 2 squires, also clad for the chase. These, seeing the considerable company gathered there, paused as though in surprise, and whilst they stood so, there suddenly appeared another knight upon a black horse, clad in complete armor, and he seemed to be very angry. For he ran upon the half-armed knight and smote him so sorry a blow with his sword that the first knight fell down from his horse and lay upon the ground as though dead, whereat the lady who was with him shrieked with great dolour. Then the full-armed knight upon the black horse ran to the lady and catched her, and he lifted her from her palfrey and laid her across the horn of his saddle, and thereupon he rode back into the forest again. The lady screamed with such vehemence of violent outcry that it was a great pity to hear her, but the knight paid no attention to her shrieking, but bore her away by main force into the forest. Then, after he and the lady had gone, the 2 squires came and lifted up the wounded knight upon his horse, and then they also went away into the forest and were gone. All this King Arthur and his court beheld from a distance, and they were so far away that they could not stay that knight upon the black horse from doing what he did to carry away the lady into the forest, nor could they bring succor to that other knight in half armor, whom they had beheld struck down in that wise. So they were very greatly grieved at what they had beheld, and knew not what to think of it. Then King Arthur said to his court, Messires, is there not some one of you who will follow up this adventure, and discover what is the significance of that which we have seen, and compel that knight to tell why he behaved as he did? Upon this, Sir Gawaine said, Lord, I shall be very glad indeed to take upon me this adventure, if I have thy leave to do so. And King Arthur said, Thou hast my leave. Then Sir Gawaine said, Lord, I would that thou would also let me take my younger brother, Gaheris, with me, as mine squire in this undertaking, for he groweth apace unto manhood, and yet he hath never beheld any considerable adventure at arms. So King Arthur said, Thou hast my leave to take thy brother with thee. At this Gaheris was very glad, for he was of an adventurous spirit, wherefore the thought of going with his brother upon this quest gave him great pleasure. So they 2 went to the pavilion of Sir Gawaine, and there Gaheris aided Sir Gawaine as his squire to don his armor. Then they rode forth upon that quest which Sir Gawaine had undertaken. Now they journeyed onward for a very considerable distance, following that direction which they had seen the hart take when it had sped away from before the hound, and when, from time to time, they would meet some of the forest folk, they would inquire of them whither had fled that white bracket and the white hart, and whither had fled the knight and the lady, and so they followed that adventure apace. By and by, after a long pass, it being far advanced in the afternoon, they were suddenly aware of a great uproar of conflict, as of a fierce battle in progress. So they followed this sound, and after a while they came to an open meadowland with very fair and level sward. Here they beheld 2 knights fighting with great vehemence of passion, and with a very deadly purpose. Then Sir Gawaine said, What is this? Let us go see. So he and Gaheris rode forward to where those 2 knights were engaged, and as they approached, the 2 knights paused in their encounter, and rested upon their weapons. Then Sir Gawaine said, Ha, messires! What is to do, and why do ye fight with such passion, the one against the other, in that wise? Then one of the knights said to Sir Gawaine, Sir, this does not concern you. And the other said, Meddle not with us, for this battle is of our own choosing. Messires, said Sir Gawaine, I would be very sorry to interfere in your quarrel, but I am in pursuit of a white hart and a white bracket that came this way, and also of a knight who hath carried off a lady upon the same pass. Now I would be greatly beholden to ye if you would tell me if ye had seen aught of one or the other. Then that knight who had first spoken said, Sir, this is a very strange matter, for it was upon account of that very white hart and that bracket, and of the knight and the lady, that we 2 were just now engaged in that battle as thou didst behold. For the case is this, we are 2 brothers, and we were riding together in great amity, when that hart and that hound came hitherward. Then my brother said he very greatly hoped that the white hart would escape from the hound, and I said that I hoped that the hound would overtake the hart and bring it to earth. Then came that knight with that lady, his captive, and I said that I would follow that knight and rescue the lady, and my brother said that he would undertake that adventure. Upon these points we fell into dispute, for it appeared to me that I felt great affection for that hound, and my brother felt an extraordinary regard for the white hart, and that, as I had first spoken, I should have the right to follow that adventure, but my brother felt affection for the hart, and he considered that, as he was the elder of us twain, he had the best right to that adventure. So we quarrelled, and by we fell to upon that fight in which thou did see us engage. At this Sir Gawaine was very greatly astonished, and he said, Messires, I cannot understand how so great a quarrel should have arisen from so small a dispute, and, certes, it is a great pity for two brothers to quarrel as ye have done, and to give one another such sore cuts and wounds as I perceive you have both received. Messires, said the second knight, I think thou art right, and I now find myself to be very much ashamed of that quarrel. And the other said, I too am sorry for what I have done. Then Sir Gawaine said, Sirs, I would be very glad indeed if you would tell me your names. And the one knight said, I am called Sir Lois of the forest. And the other said, I am called Sir Brian of the forest. Then Sir Lois said, Sir Knight, I would deem it a very great courtesy if thou wouldest tell me who thou art. I would be very glad to do that, said Sir Gawaine, and therewith he told them his name and condition. Now, when they heard who Sir Gawaine was, those two knights were very greatly astonished and pleased, for no one in all the courts of chivalry was more famous than Sir Gawaine, the son of King Lot of Orkney. Wherefore those two brothers said, It is certainly a great joy to us to meet so famous a knight as thou art, Sir Gawaine. Then Sir Gawaine said, Sir Knights, that hart and that hound came only a short while ago to where King Arthur and Queen Guinevere and their courts of lords and ladies were at feast, and there, likewise, we all beheld that knight seize upon the lady and make her his captive. Wherefore I and my brother have come forth upon command of King Arthur, for to discover what is the meaning of that which we beheld. Now, I deem it a very great courtesy upon your part if you will cease from this adventure, and will go in amity unto the court of the king, and will tell him of what ye beheld, and of how you quarrelled, and of how we met. For otherwise I myself will have to engage ye both, and that would be a great pity, for ye are weary with battle, and I am fresh. Then those two knights said, Sir, we will do as you desire, for we have no wish to have to do with so powerful a knight as you. Thereupon those two knights departed, and went to the court of King Arthur as Sir Gawaine ordained, and Sir Gawaine and his brother rode forward upon their adventure. Now by and by they came nigh to a great river, and they beheld before them a single knight in full armour, who carried a spear in his hand, and a shield hanging to his saddle-bow. Thereupon Sir Gawaine made haste forward, and he called aloud to the knight, and the knight paused and waited until Sir Gawaine had overtaken him. And when Sir Gawaine came up to that knight, he said, Sir Knight, hast thou seen a white hart and a white hound pass by this way? And hast thou seen a knight bearing off a captive lady? Unto this the knight said, Yea, I beheld them both, and I am even now following after them with intent to discover whither they are bound. Then Sir Gawaine said, Sir Knight, I bid thee not to follow this adventure farther, for I myself am set upon it. Wherefore I desire thee for to give it over, so that I may undertake it in thy stead. Sir, said the knight, speaking with a very great deal of heat, I know not who thou art, nor do I care a very great deal, but touching the pursuance of this adventure, I do tell thee that I myself intend to follow it to the end, and so I will do. Let who will undertake to stay me. Thereupon Sir Gawaine said, Messire, thou shalt not go forward upon this adventure, unless thou hast first to do with me. And the knight said, Sir, I am very willing for that. So each knight took such a stand upon that field as appeared to him to be best, and each put himself into a posture of defence, and dressed his shield and his spear. Then, when they were thus prepared in all ways, they immediately launched forward, and one against the other, rushing together with great speed and with such an uproar that the ground trembled and shook beneath them. So they met together in the midst of the course, and the spear of the strange knight burst all into small pieces, but the spear of Sir Gawaine held, wherefore he hurled that knight out of his saddle with such violence that he smote the ground with a blow like an earthquake. Then Sir Gawaine rode back to where his enemy was, for that knight was unable to rise, and he removed the helmet from the head of the fallen knight, and beheld that he was very young and comely. Now when the fresh air smote upon the knight's face, he presently awoke from his swoon, and came back unto his senses again, whereupon Sir Gawaine said, "Dost thou yield unto me?" And the knight said, "I do so." Then Sir Gawaine said, "Who art thou?" And the knight said, "I am called Sir Alardin of the Isles." "Very well," said Sir Gawaine. "Then I lay my command upon thee in this wise, that thou shalt go to the court of King Arthur and deliver thyself to him as a captive of my prowess. And thou art to tell him all that thou knowest of the hart and the hound and the knight and the lady, and thou shalt tell him all that hath befallen thee in this assault." So the knight said that he would do that, and thereupon they parted, the one party going the one way, and the other party going the other way. After that Sir Gawaine and his brother Gaheris rode a considerable distance until they came, by and by, through a woodland into an open plain. And it was now about the time of sunset, and they beheld in the midst of the plain a very stately and noble castle with 5 towers and of very great strength. And right here they saw a sight that filled them with great sorrow, for they beheld the dead body of that white brachet lying beside the road like any carrion. And they saw that the hound was pierced through with 3 arrows, wherefore they wist that it had been slain very violently. Now when Sir Gawaine beheld that beautiful hound lying dead in this wise, he was filled with great sorrow. "What a pity it is," he cried, "that this noble hound should be slain in this wise, for I think that it was the most beautiful hound that I ever saw in all my life. Here hath assuredly been great treachery against it, for it hath been foully dealt with because of that white hart which it pursued. Now I make my vow that if I can find that hart I will slay it with mine own hands, because it was in that chase that the hound met its death." After that they rode forward toward that castle, and as they drew nigh, lo, they beheld that white hart with the golden collar browsing upon the meadows before the castle. Now as soon as the white hart beheld the 2 strangers, it fled with great speed toward the castle, and it ran into the courtyard of the castle. And when Sir Gawaine beheld the stag, he gave chase in pursuit of it with great speed, and Gaheris followed after his brother. So Sir Gawaine pursued the white hart into the courtyard of the castle, and from thence it could not escape. Then Sir Gawaine leaped him down from his horse, and drew his sword, and slew the hart with a single blow of his weapon. This he did in great haste, but when he had done that, and it was too late to mend it, he repented him of what he had done very sorely. Now with all this tumult there came out the lord and the lady of that castle, and the lord was one of very haughty and noble aspect, and the lady was extraordinarily graceful and very beautiful of appearance. And Sir Gawaine looked upon the lady, and he thought he had hardly ever seen so beautiful a dame, wherefore he was more sorry than ever that, in his haste, he had slain that white hart. But when the lady of the castle beheld the white hart, that it lay dead upon the stone pavement of the courtyard, she smote her hands together and shrieked with such shrillness and strength that it pierced the ears to hear her. And she cried out, "O my white hart, art thou then dead?" And therewith she fell to weeping with great passion. Then Sir Gawaine said, "Lady, I am very sorry for what I have done, and I would that I could undo it." Then the lord of that castle said to Sir Gawaine, "Sir, didst thou slay that stag?" "Yea," said Sir Gawaine. "Sir," said the lord of the castle, "thou hast done very ill in this matter, and if thou wilt wait a little, I will take full vengeance upon thee." Unto which Sir Gawaine said, "I will wait for thee as long as it shall please thee." Then the lord of the castle went into his chamber, and clad himself in his armor, and in a little while he came out very fiercely. "Sir," said Sir Gawaine, "what is thy quarrel with me?" And the lord of the castle said, Because thou hast slain the white hart that was so dear to my lady. To which Sir Gawaine said, I would not have slain the white hart, only that because of it the white brachet was so treacherously slain. Upon this the lord of the castle was more wroth than ever, and he ran at Sir Gawaine, and smote him unawares, so that he clave through the epauliere of his armour, and cut through the flesh and unto the bone of the shoulder, so that Sir Gawaine was put into a great agony of pain at the stroke. Then Sir Gawaine was filled with rage at the pain of the wound, wherefore he smote the knight so woefully a blow that he cut through his helmet and into the bone beneath, and thereupon the knight fell down upon his knees because of the fierceness of the blow, and he could not rise up again. Then Sir Gawaine catched his helmet and rushed it off from his head. Upon this the knight said in a weak voice, Sir Knight, I crave mercy of you, and yield myself to you. But Sir Gawaine was furious with anger because of the unexpected blow which he had received, and because of the great agony of the wound, wherefore he would not have mercy, but lifted up his sword with intent to slay that knight. Then the lady of the castle beheld what Sir Gawaine was intent to do, and she brake away from her damsels and ran, and flung herself upon the knight, so as to shield him with her own body. And in that moment Sir Gawaine was striking, and could not stay his blow. Nevertheless, he was able to turn his sword in his hand, so that the edge thereof did not smite the lady. But the flat of the sword struck her upon the neck, a very grievous blow, and the blade cut her a little, so that the blood ran down her smooth white neck and over her kerchief, and, with violence of the blow, the lady fell down and lay upon the ground as though she were dead. Now when Sir Gawaine beheld that, he thought that he had slain the lady in his haste, and he was all adread at what he had done, wherefore he cried, Woe is me, what have I done? Alas, said Gaheris, that was a very shameful blow that thou didst strike, and the shame of it is mine also, because thou art my brother. Now I wish I had not come with thee to this place. Then Sir Gawaine said to the lord of that castle, Sir, I will spare thy life, for I am very sorry for what I have done in my haste. But the knight of the castle was filled with great bitterness, because he thought that his lady was dead. Wherefore he cried out as in despair, I will not now have thy mercy, for thou art a knight without mercy and without pity. And since thou hast slain my lady, who is dearer to me than my life, thou mayest slay me also, for that is the only service which thou canst now tender me. But by now the damsels of the lady had come to where she lay, and the chiefest of those cried out to the lord of the castle, Sir, thy lady is not dead, but only in a swoon from which she will presently recover. Then, when the lord of the castle heard that, he fell to weeping in great measure with pure joy, for now that he knew his lady was alive, he could not contain himself for joy. Therewith Sir Gawaine came to him and lifted him up from the ground where he was, and kissed him upon the cheek. Then certain others came and bare the lady away into her chamber, and there in a little while she recovered from that swoon, and was but little the worse for the blow that she had received. That night Sir Gawaine and his brother Gaheris abided with the knight and the lady, and when the knight learned who Sir Gawaine was, he felt it great honour to have so famous a knight in that place. So they feasted together that evening in great amity. Now after they had refreshed themselves, Sir Gawaine said, I beseech you, sir, to tell me what was the meaning of the white hart and the white brachet which led me into this adventure. To this the lord of the castle, whose name was Sir Albemarle of the Maurice, said, I will do so, and therewith he spake as follows. You must know, sir, that I have a brother who hath always been very dear to me, and when I took this, my lady, unto wife, he took her sister his wife. Now my brother dwelt in a castle nigh to this, and we held commerce together in great amity. But it befell a day that my lady and my brother's lady were riding through this forest together, discoursing very pleasantly. What time there appeared a lady unto them, exceedingly beautiful, and a very strange appearance, for I do not think that either my lady or her sister ever beheld her like before. This strange lady brought unto those two ladies a white hart and a white brachet, and the hart and the hound she held each by a silver chain attached to a golden collar that encircled its neck. And the white hart she gave unto my lady, and the white brachet she gave unto my lady's sister, and then she went away, leaving them very glad. But their gladness did not last for very long, for ever since that time there hath been nothing else but discord between my brother and myself, and between my lady and her sister. For the white hound hath ever sought the white hart for to destroy it. Wherefore I and my lady have entertained very great offence against my brother and his lady, because they did not keep the white bracket at home. So it has come to pass that a number of times we have sought to destroy the hound, so that my brother and his lady have held equal offence against us. Now this day it chanced I was toward the outskirts of the forest to the east of us, when I heard a great outcry in the woodland, and by the white hart that belonged to my lady came fleeing through the woodland, and the white bracket that belonged to my brother's lady was in pursuit of it. And my brother and his lady and 2 squires followed rapidly after the hart and the bracket. Then I was greatly angered, for it seemed to me they were chasing this white hart out of despite of my lady and myself. Wherefore I followed after them with all speed. So I came upon them at the outskirts of the woodland, nigh to where there were a number of pavilions pitched in the shade of a glade of trees in the midst of the meadow, and there, in mine anger, I struck my brother a great blow, so that I smote him down from his horse. And I catched his lady, and I threw her across the horn of my saddle, and I bore her away here to this castle. And here I have held her out of revenge, because they pursued the white hart which belonged to my lady. For my lady loved that hart, as she loved nothing else in the world excepting myself. Sir, said Sir Gawaine, this is a very strange matter. Now I beseech thee to tell me of what appearance was that lady who gave the white hart and the white hound unto those 2 ladies. Sir, said the knight, she was clad all in crimson, and about her throat and arms were a great many ornaments of gold, beset with stones of divers colours, and her hair was red like gold, and was enmeshed in a net of gold, and her eyes were very black and shone with exceeding brightness, and her lips were like coral, so that she possessed a very strange appearance. Ha, said Sir Gawaine, from this description methinks that lady could have been none other than the sorceress Vivian. For now she spendeth all her time in doing such mischief as this by means of her enchantment, out of pure despite. And indeed, I think it would be a very good thing if she were put out of this world, so that she could do no more such mischief. But tell me, messieurs, where is that lady, thy wife's sister? Sir, said the knight, she is in this castle, and is a prisoner of honour. Well, quoth Sir Gawaine, since now both the hart and the hound are dead, ye can assuredly bear no more enmity towards her and your brother. Wherefore I do beseech you that you will let her go free, and will enter again into a condition of amity and good will the one with the other, in such a manner as hath afore obtained between you. And the lord of the castle said, Sir, it shall be so. And he set the lady free at that time, and thereafter there was amity between them, as Sir Gawaine had ordained. And the next day Sir Gawaine and his brother Gaheris returned into the court of the king, and he told King Arthur and his court all that had befallen, hiding nothing from them. Now Queen Guinevere was very much displeased when she heard how Sir Gawaine would show no mercy to that knight, and how he had struck the lady with his sword. Wherefore she said aside to one of those who stood nigh to her, It seems to me to be a very strange thing for a belted knight to do, to refuse to give mercy unto a fallen enemy, and to strike a lady with his sword. For I should think that any sword that hath drawn blood from a lady in such wise would be dishonoured for I. And I cannot think that any one would strike a lady in that wise, would hold himself guiltless unto his vow of knighthood. This Sir Gawaine overheard, and he was exceedingly wroth thereat, but he concealed his anger at that time. Only after he had gone away, he said to Gaheris, his brother, I believe that lady hateth me with all her heart, but sometime I will show to her that I have in me more courtesy and am more gentle than she believes me to be. As for my sword, since she deemeth to be dishonoured by that blow, I will not use it any more. So he took the sword out of its sheath, and brake it across his knee, and flung it away. Now all this hath been told to set forth that which follows, for there ye shall learn what great things of nobility Sir Gawaine could do when it behoved him to do them. For, haply, ye who have read this story may feel as Queen Guinevere did, that Sir Gawaine was not rightwise courteous as a belted knight should have been in that adventure aforetold. Chapter 2nd. How King Arthur became lost in the forest, and how he fell into a very singular adventure in a castle unto which he came. Now it befell upon a time some while after this, that King Arthur was at Tintagilon upon certain affairs of state, and Queen Guinevere in her court and the king's court made progression from Camelot unto Carleon, and there they abided until the king should be through his business at Tintagilon, and should join them at Carleon. Now that time was the spring of the year, and all things were very jolly and gay, wherefore King Arthur became possessed with a great desire for adventure. So he called unto him a certain favourite squire, hight Bosenard. And he said to him, Bosenard, this day is so pleasant that I hardly know how I may contain myself because of the joy I take in it, for it seems to be that my heart is nigh ready to burst with a great pleasure of desiring. So I am of a mind to go a-gadding with only thee for companion. To this Bosenard said, Lord, I know of nothing that would give to me a greater pleasure than that. So King Arthur said, Very well. Let us then go away from this place in such a manner that no one will be aware of our departure. And so we will go to Carleon and surprise the queen by coming unexpectedly to that place. So Bosenard brought armor without device, and he clad the king in that armor. And then they two rode forth together, and no one wist that they had left the castle. And when they came forth into the fields, King Arthur whistled and sang and jested and laughed and made himself merry. For he was as a war horse, turned forth upon the grass that taketh glory in the sunshine and the warm air, and becometh like unto a colt again. So by and by they came into the forest, and rode that way with great content of spirit. And they took this path, and they took that path for no reason but because the day was so gay and jolly. So by and by they lost their way in the mazes of the woodland, and knew not where they were. Now, when they found themselves to be lost in that wise, they journeyed with more circumspection, going first by this way and then by that, but in no manner could they find their way out from their entanglement. And so fell night time, and they knew not where they were. But all became very dark and obscure, and the woodland was full of strange and unusual sounds around about them. Then King Arthur said, Bosenard, this is a very perplexing pass, and I do not know how we shall find lodging for this night. To this Bosenard said, Lord, if I have thy permission to do so, I will climb one of these trees and see if I can discover any sign of habitation in this wilderness. And King Arthur said, Do so, I pray thee. So Bosenard climbed a very tall tree, and from the top of the tree he beheld a light a great distance away, and he said, Lord, I see a light in that direction. And therewith he came down from the tree again. So King Arthur and Bosenard went in the direction that Bosenard had beheld the light, and by they came out of the forest and into an open place, where they beheld a very great castle with several tall towers, very grim and forbidding of appearance. And it was from this castle that the light had appeared that Bosenard had seen. So they two rode up to the castle, and Bosenard called aloud and smote upon the gate of the castle. Then immediately there came a porter, and demanded of them what they would have. Unto him Bosenard said, Sirrah, we would come in to lodge for tonight, for we are aweary. So the porter said, Who are you? Speaking very roughly and rudely to them, for he could not see of what condition they were, because of the darkness. Then Bosenard said, This is a knight of very good quality, and I am his squire, and we have lost our way in the forest, and now we come hither seeking shelter. Sir, said the porter, if ye know what is good for you, ye will sleep in the forest rather than come into this place, for this is no very good retreat for errant knights to shelter themselves. Upon this King Arthur bespake the porter, for that which the porter said aroused great curiosity within him. So he said, Nay, we will not go away from here, and we demand to lodge here for this night. Then the porter said, Very well, ye may come in." And thereupon he opened the gate, and they rode into the courtyard of that castle. Now at the noise of their coming there appeared a great many lights within the castle, and there came running forth divers attendants. Some of these aided King Arthur and Bosenard to dismount, and others took the horses, and others again brought basins of water for them to wash withal. And after they had washed their faces and hands, other attendants brought them into the castle. Now, as they came into the castle, they were aware of a great noise of very many people talking and laughing together, with the sound of singing as of harping. And so they came into the hall of the castle, and beheld that it was lighted with a great number of candles and tapers and torches. Here they found a multitude of people gathered at a table spread for a feast. And at the head of the table there sat a knight, well advanced in years, and with hair and beard white as milk. Yet he was exceedingly strong and sturdy of frame, having shoulders of wonderful broadness and a great girth of chest. This knight was of a very stern and forbidding appearance, and was clad altogether in black, and he wore around his neck a chain of gold, with a locket of gold hanging pendant from it. Now, when this knight beheld King Arthur and Bosenard come into the hall, he called aloud to them in a very great voice, bidding them to come and sit with him at the head of the table. And they did so, and those at the head of the table made place for them, and thus they sat there beside the knight. Now King Arthur and Bosenard were exceedingly hungry, wherefore they ate with great appetite and made joy of the entertainment which they had received. And meantime the knight held them in very pleasant discourse, talking to them of such things as would give them the most entertainment. So after a while the feast was ended, and they ceased from eating. Then of a sudden the knight said to King Arthur, "Messire, thou art young and lusty of spirit, and I doubt not but thou hast a great heart within thee. What say you now to a little sport betwixt us two?" Upon this King Arthur regarded that knight very steadily, and he believed that his face was not so old as it looked, for his eyes were exceedingly bright and shone like sparks of light. Wherefore he was a doubt, and he said, "Sir, what sport would you have?" Upon this the knight fell a-laughing in great measure, and he said, "This is a very strange sport that I have in mind, for it is this, that thou and I shall prove the one unto the other what courage each of us may have." And so King Arthur said, "How shall we prove that?" Whereunto the knight made reply, "This is what we shall do. Thou and I shall stand forth in the middle of this hall, and thou shalt have leave to try to strike off my head. And if I can receive that blow without dying therefrom, then I shall have leave to strike thy head off in a like manner." Upon his speech King Arthur was greatly adread, and he said, "This is a very strange sport for two men to engage upon." Now, when King Arthur said this, all those who were in the hall burst out laughing beyond all measure, as though they would never stint from their mirth. Then, when they had become in a measure quiet again, the knight of that castle said, "Sir, art thou afraid of that sport?" Upon which King Arthur fell very angry, and he said, "Nay, I am not afeared, for no man hath ever yet had reason to say that I showed myself afeared of any one." "Very well," said the knight of the castle, "then let us try that sport of which I spake." And King Arthur said, "I am willing." Then Bosenard came to King Arthur where he was, and he said, "Lord, do not thou enter into this thing, but rather let me undertake this venture in thy stead, for I am assured that some great treachery is meditated against thee." But King Arthur said, "Nay, no man shall take my danger upon himself, but I will assume mine own danger without calling upon any man to take it." So he said to the knight of the castle, "Sir, I am ready for that sport of which thou didst speak. But who is to strike that first blow, and how shall we draw lots therefore?" "Messire," said the knight of the castle, "there shall be no lots drawn, for as thou art the guest of this place, so shall thou have the first to say at that sport." Therewith that knight arose, and laid aside his black robe, and he was clad beneath in a shirt of fine linen, very cunningly worked, and he wore hosen of crimson. Then he opened that linen undergarment at the throat, and he turned down the collar thereof, so as to lay his neck bare to the blow. Thereupon he said, Now, Sir Knight, thou shalt have to strike well if thou wouldest win at this sport. But King Arthur showed no dread of that undertaking, for he arose and drew Excalibur so that the blade of the sword flashed with exceeding brightness. Then he measured his distance, and lifted the sword, and he smote the knight of the castle with all his might upon the neck. And lo! The blade cut through the neck of the knight of the castle with wonderful ease, so that the head flew from the body to a great distance away. But the trunk of the body of that knight did not fall, but instead of that it stood, and walked to where the head lay, and the hands of the trunk picked up the head, and they set the head back upon the body, and lo! That knight was as sound and whole as ever he had been in all his life. Upon this all those in the castle shouted and made great mirth, and they called upon King Arthur that it was now his turn to try that sport. So the king prepared himself, laying aside his surcoat and opening his undergarment at the throat, as the knight of the castle had done. And at that Bosenard made great lamentation. Then the knight of the castle said, Sir, art thou afeard? And King Arthur said, No, I am not afeard, for every man must come to his death sometime, and it appears that my time hath now come, and that I am to lay down my life in this foolish fashion for no fault of mine own. Then the knight of the castle said, Well, stand thou away a little distance, so that I may not strike thee too close, so as to lose the virtue of my blow. So King Arthur stood forth in the midst of the hall, and the knight of the castle swung his sword several times, but did not strike. Likewise, he several times laid the blade of the sword upon King Arthur's neck, and it was very cold. Then King Arthur cried out in great passion, Sir, it is thy right to strike, but I beseech thee not to torment me in this manner. Nay, said the knight of the castle, it is my right to strike when it pleases me, and I will not strike any before that time. For if it pleases me, I will torment thee for a great while ere I slay thee. So he laid his sword several times more upon King Arthur's neck, and King Arthur said no more, but bore that torment with a very steadfast spirit. Then the knight of the castle said, Thou appearest to be a very courageous and honorable knight, and I have a mind to make a covenant with thee. And King Arthur said, What is that covenant? It is this, said the knight of the castle. I will spare thee thy life for a year and a day, if thou wilt pledge me thy knightly word to return hither at the end of that time. Then King Arthur said, Very well, it shall be so. And therewith he pledged his knightly word to return at the end of that time, swearing to that pledge upon the cross of the hilt of Excalibur. Then the knight of the castle said, I will make another covenant with thee. What is it? Said King Arthur. My second covenant is this, quoth the knight of the castle. I will give to thee a riddle. And if thou wilt answer that riddle when thou returnest hither, and if thou makest no mistake in that answer, then I will spare thy life and set thee free. And King Arthur said, What is that riddle? To which the knight made reply, The riddle is this. What is it that a woman desires most of all in the world? Sir, said King Arthur, I will seek to find the answer to that riddle, and I will give thee gramercy for sparing my life for so long a time as thou hast done, and for giving me the chance to escape my death. Upon this, the knight of the castle smiled very sourly, and he said, I do not offer this to thee because of mercy to thee, but because I find pleasure in tormenting thee. For what delight canst thou have in living thy life, when thou knowest that thou must, for a surety, die at the end of one short year? And what pleasure canst thou have in living even that year when thou shalt be tormented with anxiety to discover the answer to my riddle? Then King Arthur said, I think thou art very cruel. And the knight said, I am not denying that. So that night King Arthur and Bosenard lay at the castle, and the next day they took their way thence. And King Arthur was very heavy and troubled in spirit. Nevertheless, he charged Bosenard that he should say nothing concerning that which had befallen, and that he should keep it in secret. And Bosenard did as the king commanded, and said nothing concerning the adventure. Now, in that year which followed, King Arthur settled his affairs. He also sought everywhere to find the answer to that riddle. Many there were who gave him answers in plenty, for one said that a woman most desired wealth, and another said she most desired beauty. And one said she desired power to please, and another said that she most desired fine raiment. And one said this, and another said that, but no answer appeared to King Arthur to be good and fitting for his purpose. So the year passed by, only until a fortnight remained, and then King Arthur could not abide to stay where he was any longer, for it seemed to him his time was very near to hand, and he was filled with a very bitter anxiety of soul, wherefore he was very restless to be away. So he called Bosenard to him, and he said, Bosenard, help me to arm, for I am going away. And Bosenard fell a-weeping in a very great measure, and he said, Lord, do not go. At this King Arthur looked very sternly at his squire, and said, Bosenard, how is this? Wouldst thou tempt me to violate mine honour? It is not very hard to die, but it will be very bitter to live my life in dishonour. Wherefore tempt me no more, but do my bidding and hold thy peace. And if I do not return in a month from this time, then mayest thou tell all that hath befallen. And thou mayest tell Sir Constantine of Cornwall that he is to search the papers in my cabinet, and that there he will find all that is to be done should death overtake me. So Bosenard put a plain suit of armour upon King Arthur, though he could hardly see what he was about for the tears that flowed down out of his eyes in great abundance. And he laced upon the armour of the king a surcoat without device, and he gave the king a shield without device. Thereupon King Arthur rode away without considering whither his way took him. And of every one whom he met he inquired what that thing was that a woman most desired, and no one could give him an answer that appeared to him to be what it should be, wherefore he was in great doubt and torment of spirit. Now the day before King Arthur was to keep his covenant at the castle, he was wandering through the adjacent forest in great travail of soul, for he wist not what he should do to save his life. As he wandered so, he came of a sudden upon a small hut built up under an overhanging oak tree, so that it was very hard to tell where the oak tree ended and the hut began. And there were a great many large rocks all about covered with moss, so that the king might very easily have passed by the hut, only that he beheld a smoke to arise therefrom, as from a fire that burned within. So he went to the hut, and opened the door, and entered. At first he thought there was no one there, but when he looked again he beheld an old woman sitting bent over a small fire that burned upon the hearth. And King Arthur had never beheld such an ugly beldame as that one who sat there bending over that fire, for her ears were very huge and flapped, and her hair hung down over her head like to snakes, and her face was covered all over with wrinkles, so that there was not any place at all where there was not a wrinkle, and her eyes were bleared and covered with a film, and the eyelids were red, as with the continual weeping of her eyes, and she had but one tooth in her mouth, and her hands, which she spread out to the fire, were like claws of bone. Then King Arthur gave her greeting, and she gave the king greeting, and she said to him, My lord king, whence come ye, and why do ye come to this place? Then King Arthur was greatly astonished that the old woman should know him, who he was, and he said, Who are you that appeareth to know me? No matter, she said. I am one who meaneth you well. So tell me, what is the trouble that brings you here at this time? So the king confessed all his trouble to that old woman, and he asked her if she knew the answer to that riddle. What is it that a woman desires most? Yea, said the old woman, I know the answer to that riddle very well, but I will not tell it to thee unless thou wilt promise me something in return. At this King Arthur was filled with very great joy that the old woman should know the answer to that riddle, and he was filled with doubt of what she would demand him, wherefore he said, What is it thou must have in return for that answer? Then the old woman said, If I aid thee to guess thy riddle aright, thou must promise that I shall become wife unto one of the knights of thy court, whom I may choose when thou returnest homeward again." "Ha!" said King Arthur. "How may I promise that upon behalf of any one?" Upon this the old woman said, "Are not the knights of thy court of such nobility that they will do that to save thee from death?" "I believe they are," said King Arthur, and with that he meditated a long while, saying unto himself, "What will my kingdom do if I die at this time? I have no right to die." So he said to the old woman, "Very well, I will make that promise." Then she said unto the king, "This is the answer to that riddle. That which a woman most desires is to have her will." And the answer seemed to King Arthur to be altogether right. Then the old woman said, "My lord king, thou hast been played upon by that knight who hath led thee into this trouble, for he is a great conjurer and a magician of a very evil sort. He carrieth his life not within his body, but in a crystal globe which he weareth in a locket hanging about his neck. Wherefore it was that when thou didst cut the head from off his body, his life remained in that locket, and he did not die. But if thou hadst destroyed that locket, then he would immediately have died." "I will mind me of that," said King Arthur. So King Arthur abided with that old woman for the night, and she refreshed him with meat and drink, and served him very well. And the next morning he set forth unto that castle where he had made his covenant, and his heart was more cheerful than it had been for a whole year. Chapter 3rd. How King Arthur overcame the knight enchanter, and how Sir Gawaine manifested the nigh nobility of his knighthood. Now when King Arthur came to the castle, the gateway thereof was immediately opened to him, and he entered. And when he had entered, sundry attendants came and conducted him into the hall where he had aforetime been. Then he beheld the knight of that castle, and a great many people, who had come to witness the conclusion of the adventure. And when the knight beheld King Arthur, he said to him, "Sir, hast thou come to redeem thy pledge?" "Yea," said King Arthur, "for so I made my vow to thee." Then the knight of the castle said, "Sir, hast thou guessed that riddle?" And King Arthur said, "I believe that I have." The knight of the castle said, "Then let me hear thy answer thereto, but if thou makest any mistake, or if thou dost not guess aright, then thy life is forfeit." "Very well," said King Arthur, "let it be that way. Now, this is the answer to thy riddle. That which a woman most desires is to have her will." Now, when the lord of the castle heard King Arthur guess aright, he wist not what to say or where to look, and those who were there also perceived that the king had guessed aright. Then King Arthur came very close to that knight with great sternness of demeanor, and he said, "Now, thou traitor knight, thou didst ask me to enter into thy sport with thee a year ago, so at these present it is my turn to ask thee to have sport with me. And this is the sport I will have, that thou shalt give me that chain and locket that hang about thy neck, and that I shall give thee the collar which hangeth about my neck." At this, the face of that knight fell all pale, like to ashes, and he emitted a sound similar to the sound made by a hare when the hound lays hold upon him. Then King Arthur catched him very violently by the arm, and he catched the locket and brake it away from about the knight's neck. And upon that the knight shrieked very loud and fell down upon his knees, and besought mercy of the king, and there was a great uproar in that place. Then King Arthur opened the locket, and lo, there was a ball as of crystal, very clear and shining. And King Arthur said, "I will have no mercy." And therewith he flung the ball violently down upon the stone of the pavement, so that it brake with a loud noise. Then, upon that instant, the knight conjurer gave a piercing, bitter cry, and fell down upon the ground. And when they ran to raise him up, behold, he was entirely dead. Now, when the people of that castle beheld their knight thus suddenly dead, and when they beheld King Arthur how he stood in the fury of his kingly majesty, They were greatly afeared, so that they shrunk away from the king where he stood. Then the king turned and went out from that castle, and no one stayed him, and he mounted his horse and rode away, and no one gave him let or hindrance in his going. Now when the king had left the castle in that wise, he went straight to the hut where was the old beldame, and he said to her, Thou hast holpen me a very great deal in mine hour of need. So now I will fulfill that pledge which I made unto thee, for I will take thee unto my court, and thou shalt choose one of my knights for thy husband. For I think there is not one knight in all my court, but would be very glad to do anything that lieth in his power to reward one who hath saved me as thou hast done this day. Therewith he took that old woman, and he lifted her up upon the crupper of his horse. Then he himself mounted upon the horse, and so they rode away from that place. And the king comported himself to the aged beldame in all ways with the utmost consideration, as though she had been a beautiful dame of the highest degree in the land. Likewise he showed her such respect that had she been a lady of royal blood, he could not have shown greater respect to her. So in due time they reached the court, which was then at Carleon, and they came there nigh about midday. Now about that time it chanced that the queen and a number of the lords of the court, and a number of the ladies of the court, were out in the fields enjoying the pleasantness of the Maytime. For no one in all the world, excepting the squire Bosenard, knew anything of the danger that beset King Arthur. Hence all were glad of the pleasantness of the season. Now as King Arthur drew nigh to that place, these lifted up their eyes and beheld him come, and they were astonished beyond all measure to see King Arthur come to them across that field, with that old beldame behind him upon the saddle. Wherefore they stood still to wait until King Arthur reached them. But when King Arthur had come to them, he did not dismount from his horse, but sat thereon regarding them all very steadfastly. And Queen Guinevere said, Sir, what is this? Hast thou a mind to play some merry jest this day, that thou hast brought hither that old woman? Lady, said King Arthur, excepting for this old woman, it were like to have been a very sorry jest for thee and for me. For had she not aided me, I would now have been a dead man, and in a few days you would doubtless all have been in great passion of sorrow. Then all they who were there marveled very greatly at the king's words. And the queen said, Sir, what is it that hath befallen me? Thereupon King Arthur told them all that had happened to him from the very beginning, when he and Bosenard had left the castle of Tintagalon. And when he had ended his story, they were greatly amazed. Now there were 17 lords of the court there present. So when King Arthur had ended his story, he said unto these, Messieurs, I have given my pledge unto this aged woman, that any one of you whom she may choose shall take her unto him as his wife, and shall treat her with all the regard that it is possible for him to do. For this was the condition that she laid upon me. Now tell me, did I do right in making unto her my pledge that I would fulfill that which she desired? And all those who were present said, Yea, Lord, thou didst right, for we would do all in the world for to save thee from such peril as that which thou hast escaped. Then King Arthur said to that old woman, Lady, is there any of these knights here whom you would choose for to be your husband? Upon this, the old woman pointed with her very long, bony finger unto Sir Gawaine, saying, Yea, I would marry that lord, for I see by the chain that is around his neck, and by the golden circlet upon his hair, and by the haughty nobility of his aspect, that he must be the son of a king. Then King Arthur said unto Sir Gawaine, Sir, art thou willing to fulfill my pledge unto this old woman? And Sir Gawaine said, Yea, Lord, whatsoever thou requirest of me, that I will do. So Sir Gawaine came to the old woman, and took her hand into his, and set it to his lips, and not one of all those present so much as smiled. Then they all turned their faces and returned unto the king's castle, and they were very silent and downcast, for this was sore trouble that had come upon that court. Now after they had returned unto the court, they assigned certain apartments therein to that old woman, and they clad her in rich raiment such as a queen might wear, and they assigned unto her a court such as was fit for a queen. And it seemed to all the court that, in the rich robes which she wore, she was 10 times more ugly than she was before. So when 11 days had passed, Sir Gawaine was wedded to that old woman in the chapel of the king's court, with great ceremony and pomp of circumstance, and all those who were there were as sad and sorrowful as though Sir Gawaine had been called upon to suffer his death. Afterward that they were married, Sir Gawaine and the old woman went to Sir Gawaine's house, and there Sir Gawaine shut himself off from all the world, and suffered no one to come nigh to him, for he was proud beyond all measure, and in this great humiliation he suffered in such a wise that words cannot tell how great was that humiliation. Wherefore he shut himself away from the world, that no one might behold his grief and his shame. And all the rest of that day he walked continually up and down his chamber, for he was altogether in such despair that it came unto his mind that it would be well if he took his own life, for it seems to him impossible for to suffer such shame as that which had come upon him. So after a while it fell, the dark of the early night, and therewith a certain strength came to Sir Gawaine, and he said, "This is a shame for me to behave in this way, for since I have married that lady, she is my true wedded wife, and I do not treat her with that regard unto which she hath the right." So he went out of that place and sought the apartment of that old woman who was his wife, and by that time it was altogether dark. But when Sir Gawaine had come into that place where she was, that old woman upbraided him, crying out upon him, "So, sir, you have treated me but ill upon this our wedding day, for you have stayed all the afternoon away from me, and now only come to me when it is dark night." And Sir Gawaine said, "Lady, I could not help it, for I was very sore oppressed with many cares. But if I have disregarded thee this day, I do beseech thy forgiveness therefore, and I will hold myself willing to do all that is in my power to recompense thee for any neglect that I have placed upon thee." Then the lady said, "Sir, it is very dark in this place. Let us have a light." "It shall be as thou dost desire," said Sir Gawaine, "and I myself will go and fetch a light for thee." So Sir Gawaine went forth from that place, and he brought 2 waxen tapers, one in either hand, and he bore them in candlesticks of gold, for he was minded to show all respect unto that old woman. And when he came into the room, he perceived that she was at the farther end of the apartment, and he went toward her, and she arose and stood before him as he approached. But when the circle of light fell upon that old woman, and when Sir Gawaine beheld her who stood before him, he cried out with a very great voice, because of the marvel and wonder of that which he saw. For, instead of that old woman whom he had left, he beheld a lady of extraordinary beauty, and in the very flower of her youth. And he beheld that her hair was long and glossy and very black, and that her lips were likewise black, like to black jewels, and that her lips were like coral, and her teeth were like pearls. So for a while Sir Gawaine could not speak, and then he cried out, "Lady, lady, who art thou?" Then that lady smiled upon Sir Gawaine with such loving kindness that he wist not what to think, other than that this was an angel who had descended to that place out of paradise. Wherefore he stood before her for a long time, and could find no more words to say, and she continued to smile upon him very kindly in that wise. Then by and by Sir Gawaine said to her, "Lady, where is that dame who is my wife?" And the lady said, "Sir Gawaine, I am she." "It is not possible," cried Sir Gawaine, "for she was old and extraordinarily ugly, but I believe that thou art beautiful beyond any lady whom I have ever beheld." And the lady said, "Nevertheless, I am she, and because thou hast taken me for thy wife with thine own free will, and with great courtesy, so is a part of that enchantment that lay upon me removed from me, for I will now be able to appear before thee in mine own true shape. For whiles a little while ago I was so ugly and foul as thou didst behold me to be, now I am to be as thou seest me, for one half the day, and the other half thereof I must be ugly as I was before." Then Sir Gawaine was filled beyond all words with great joy, and with that joy there came an extreme passion of loving regard for that lady. So he cried out aloud several times, "This is surely the most wonderful thing that ever befell any man in all the world." Therewith he fell down upon his knees, and took that lady's hands in his own hands, and kissed her hands with great fervour, and all the while she smiled upon him as she had done at first. Then again the lady said, "Come, sit thee down beside me, and let us consider what part of the day I shall be in one guise, and what part I shall be in the other guise. For all day I may have the one appearance, and all night I may have the other appearance. Then Sir Gawaine said, I would have thee in this guise during the night time, for then we are together at our own inn, and since thou art of this sort that I now see thee, I do not at all reckon how the world may regard thee. Upon this the lady spake with great animation, saying, No, sir, I would not have it in this wise, for every woman loveth the regard of the world, and I would fain enjoy such beauty as is mine before the world, and would not endure the scorn and contempt of men and women. To this Sir Gawaine said, Lady, I would have it the other way. And she said, Nay, I would have it my way. Then Sir Gawaine said, So be it, for since I have taken thee for my wife, so I must show thee respect in all matters, wherefore thou shalt have thy will in this and in all other things. Then the lady fell a laughing beyond all measure, and she said, Sir, I did but put this as a last trial upon thee, for as I am now, so I shall always be. Upon this Sir Gawaine was so filled with joy that he knew not how to contain himself. So they sat together for a long time, hand in hand. Then after a while Sir Gawaine said, Lady, who art thou? Unto which she made reply, I am one of the ladies of the lake, but for thy sake I have become mortal like to other women, and have quit that very beautiful home where I one time dwelt. I have kept thee in my heart for a considerable while, for I was not very far distant at that time when thou didst bid adieu to Sir Pelleas beside the lake. There I beheld how thou didst weep and bewail thyself when Sir Pelleas left thee, wherefore my heart went out to thee with great pity. So after a while I quitted that lake and became mortal for thy sake. Now, when I found the trouble into which King Arthur had fallen, I took that occasion to have him fetch me unto thee, so that I may test the entire nobility of thy knighthood. And lo, I have found in all that I deemed it possible to be. For though I appeared to thee so aged, so ugly, and so foul, yet thou hast treated me with such kind regard that I do not believe that thou couldst have behaved with more courtesy to me had I been the very daughter of a king. Wherefore it doth now afford me such pleasure for to possess thee for my knight and my true lord, that I cannot very well tell thee how great is my joy therein. Then Sir Gawaine said, Lady, I do not think that it can be so great as my joy in possessing thee. And thereupon he came to her, and he laid his hand upon her shoulder, and kissed her upon the lips. Then, after that, he went forth and called with a great voice all through that house, and the people of the house came running from everywhere. And he commanded that the people should bring lights and refreshments, and they brought the lights, and when they had brought them, they beheld that beautiful lady instead of the aged dame. They were filled with great wonder and joy, wherefore they cried out aloud, and clapped their hands together, and made such sound of rejoicing. And they set a great feast for Sir Gawaine and his lady, and in place of the sorrow and darkness that had been, there was joy and light, and music and singing. Wherefore those of the king's court, beholding this from a great distance, said, It is very strange that Sir Gawaine should have taken so much joy of having wedded that old beldame. But when the next morning had come, the lady clad herself in raiment of yellow silk, and she hung about her many strands of precious stones of several colours, and she set a golden crown upon her head. And Sir Gawaine let call his horse, and he let call a snow-white palfrey for the lady. And thereupon they rode out from that place and entered the court of the king. But when the king and the queen and their several courts beheld that lady, they were filled with such great astonishment that they wist not what to say for pure wonder. And when they heard all that had happened, they gave great joy and loud acclaim, so that all their mourning was changed into rejoicing. And indeed there was not one knight there of all that court who would not have given half his life to have been so fortunate in that matter as was Sir Gawaine, the son of King Lot of Orkney. Such is the story of Sir Gawaine, and from it I draw this significance. As that poor ugly beldame appeared unto the eyes of Sir Gawaine, so doth a man's duty sometimes appear to him to be ugly and exceedingly ill-favoured unto his desires. But when he shall have wedded himself unto that duty, so that he hath made it one with him, as a bridegroom maketh himself one with his bride, then doth that duty become of a sudden very beautiful unto him and unto others. So it may be with ye, that you shall take duty unto yourself, no matter how much it may mislike ye to do so. For indeed a man shall hardly have any real pleasure in his life, unless his inclination becometh wedded unto his duty, and cleaveth unto it, as a husband cleaveth unto his wife. For when inclination is thus wedded unto duty, then doth the soul take great joy unto itself, as though a wedding has taken place betwixt a bridegroom and a bride with its tabernacle. Likewise, when you shall have become entirely wedded unto your duty, then shall you become equally worthy with that good knight and gentleman Sir Gawaine. For it needs not that a man shall wear armor for to be a true knight, but only that he shall do his best endeavor with all patience and humility, as hath been ordained for him to do. Wherefore, when your time cometh unto you to display your knightness by assuming your duty, I do pray that you also may approve yourself as worthy as Sir Gawaine approved himself in this story which I have told you, as above written. Conclusion. So endeth this volume, wherein hath been told, with every circumstance of narration, the history of those three worthies who were of the court of King Arthur. And now, if God will give me the grace to do so, I will sometime, at no very great time from this, write the further history of sundry other knights and worthies, of whom I have not yet spoken. And among the first of these shall be Sir Launcelot, whom all the world knoweth to have been the greatest knight in prowess of arms of any who has lived, excepting Sir Galahad, who was his son. And I shall tell you the story of Sir Gawaine and Sir Geraint, and of Sir Percival, and of sundry others. But of this another time. For now, with great regret, I bid you adieu, and bring this history unto a close. So may God grant us to come together at another time with such happiness and prosperity that you may have a free and untroubled heart to enjoy the narrated history of those excellent men, which I shall then set before you. And that is the end of the story of King Arthur and his Knights by Howard Pyle. Next time we will pick up with a new book, but until then, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also follow me on any of these social medias, including over on Patreon. Patrons get extra benefits, like their name in the credits, videos early, and more. This has been Classical Titerature. Thanks for watching.